Hello there. Right now, the attention of the world is drawn to the plight of Ukraine, but there is much we are missing. The Western world is being swept along by events in Ukraine, and whenever the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky or one of his officials makes an appearance, it is to much acclaim. Just today, the Ukrainian ambassador was in the House of Commons gallery to witness PMQs, and the whole House, stacked full of MPs, stood and gave him a long applause, something that is normally banned in the House of Commons. Zelensky and the plucky Ukrainians have inspired 1,000 foreign volunteers to go and help defend Ukraine. And there is even talk now that China might try and help get Putin round the negotiating table for real. But whenever the name of Vladimir Putin is raised, it attracts nothing but condemnation. Far from seeing himself as the saviour of Ukraine, most of the world see him as a tyrant, a pariah. To say that Putin has lost the room is just a bit of an understatement. But while we watch Putin's advance into Ukraine, which no one in their right mind could now call a justified peacekeeping action, although many on social media do try while refusing to acknowledge the images and videos coming out of the country, while we watch that advance and see the atrocities piling up, it is easy to try and take the moral high ground. But when we do, we stand on our record of actions in places like Iraq, Libya and Syria. When we point at the cases of the Skripal and Litvinenko poisonings, we need to remember questionable events like the death of Dr. Kelly. Nothing is perfect in this world, and humans are especially flawed. So when pointing the finger at Putin, let's remember our own past is not quite as pure as the driven snow. In fact, it's worth noting that after being highly visible during Brexit and the pandemic, one Tony Blair has suddenly gone very dark. Obviously, he knows the risk of pontificating over this one right now. And also remember that Ukraine itself may not be beyond reproach where some actions in the breakaway Donbass region are concerned since 2014. Now, I'm not using this to try and excuse what the Putin regime is engaged in right now. I'm just pointing out that we forget our own flaws at our peril. And both sides are continually justifying their actions. The West is justifying why it has happily pushed Putin to the brink, and Putin is justifying why he has triggered a conflagration that could go nuclear. And both sides are backed up by their media outlets. Except the BBC, which still hounds our PM Boris Johnson on the public stage about resigning over Partygate. And right at the centre of this is Ukraine. A place the West says is a sovereign nation state that includes the territories of Donbass and Crimea, whilst Russia regards it as a mere council region of Russia, an area that Putin says belongs to Russia. But I must point out here that by recognising two regions in the Donbass as independent states, hasn't Putin just ejected them from what he claims is Russia? Anyway, there are also claims that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was justified because there are US bioweapon labs in Ukraine that threaten Russia, and that these were the first targets to be destroyed by Putin's attack. Although looking at the Russian use of munitions so far would lead me to think that if such a thing was true, it would have caused the release of the stuff, not its destruction. But what also points to Putin's expansionist ambitions is that the Belarus leader, Lukashenko, may have let slip in a briefing that Ukraine is going to be split up into 4 regions, and that Moldova is next on the Putin's list. Something I mentioned in a video a while ago as a possibility. because Moldova is sandwiched to the west between Romania and Ukraine, but is not a member of either NATO or the EU. It could be open season for Putin if he gets that close. But so far, judging by the Ukrainian response to the invasion, if Putin is victorious, it will take weeks or months, and all he will be doing is standing on the rubble under which is buried the bones of Ukrainians and Russians alike. Now, President Zelensky of Ukraine is pulling all the heartstrings and pressing all the buttons to get as much international support as he can, and it's working. He has even made several pleas for Ukraine to be swiftly accepted as an EU member state, something the EU Parliament has voted to accept. But in reality, how can a nation at war with fluid, war-torn borders become a member of the EU Single Market and Customs Union? Not only that, the EU has stringent economic and political requirements. One being the rule of law, where you do not lock up your political opponents on questionable grounds. Another being the level of corruption, although the EU itself does have a few problems here. Yes, Ukraine is on the journey, but it still has a way to go, and I don't think it measures up yet. But what if it did somehow get EU membership? Zelensky would come under intense pressure from the EU itself to hand over vast swathes of land to Russia in order to settle the geopolitical situation, and maybe so Germany could get on with Nord Stream 2 again. Although I do gather all Nord Stream 2 workers have just been fired. Now, the sanctions imposed on Russia by the West are really starting to bite, and those oligarchs and Russian companies will really be feeling the noose tightening. And while we continue to claim that this war has nothing to do with the ordinary Russian, those sanctions have already started to hurt them too, not just the oligarchs. Yes, it will hurt them and they will suffer, but they're not being shelled and starved out of existence by a vicious military action, are they? And every Russian bomb, every Russian missile, every Russian bullet, and every Ukrainian death will drive the hatred of Russia and Russians further into the heart of every remaining Ukrainian. And they, together with the rest of the civilized world, will never forgive Putin and those that supported him and fought for his cause. Can Putin not see that he will only be able to control Ukraine while he can rule with a medieval level of horror? Can he and his cronies not see that from the very start he was racking up the war crimes, and that record can now only get worse? For me, this is not the work of a Russian genius dismantling the New World Order. In fact, given that he swallowed the whole pandemic narrative hook, line, sinker, boat and jetty with his excessive self-isolation, he appears to be more a part of the New World Order than against it. And further, he and his oligarchs are, or were, sat on many billions of stolen wealth stolen from the people. That once again sounds very New World Order to me. Living the high life while the peasants starve. Anyway, while all this is going on, we are missing the continued imposition of draconian medical mandates in places like Canada and New Zealand. Just today there are reports of riots outside the grounds of the New Zealand Parliament against these measures. And there are also fears that new laws being brought forward in the UK could give the government more powers to introduce mandates here, as well as curb free speech. So keep your eyes on those too. But because Vlad the Invader holds a Chiget, a Russian nuclear weapon attaché case, he is the most pressing matter we have right now. And we will have to be careful that we don't leave him nowhere to turn except to use the buttons in that briefcase. This makes Western military action and things like no-fly zones a complete nonsense. But that could mean we are forced to bargain with Putin the pariah. But judging by his recent actions, his terms would probably be far too steep for us to stomach. How could we now leave even 1 square inch of Ukraine and its people under his rule? It looks like the only way now might be for the West to keep turning the thumbscrews on the Russian economy to force Putin's own people to remove him, however long that might take.